This is a funny story here because Ross has started EDS, I think, in '62, and the legend says that he used $1,000 of his wife's money to start the company, and he built it into a multi-billion-dollar company. GM bought him in the mid '80s, I believe it was, and he moved on to start up another company, Pro Systems.
Welcome to another episode of D50 After Dark. I'm your host, Mickey Bennett, and in today's episode, we will be meeting another one of our podcast team, Jerry Baskett. You do not want to miss this episode. Welcome to D50 After Dark, Jerry.
Thank you, Mickey. It's a pleasure to be here.
Jerry, you have been a member of the podcast team from the beginning, correct?
Correct.
And you're our graphic designer and production assistant.
That's correct. I got involved initially because I just wanted to learn about podcasts, and as it turned out, one of the first orders of business that we needed some kind of logo backdrop, and just putting it together, I decided to go for a bunch of night scenes from all of the different places that District 50 is involved with, and came up with the design. And I think it was a little tweaking at the very end, but basically that's was something that I just thought up out of my head.
Yeah, so it started with the logo, and from there it grew into so much more.
It has. It's kind of funny because, like, when you start small or you start at the very beginning, you have an opportunity to see the whole picture of what is involved in putting a production like this together. And like I said, one of the big things that I thought about was the fact that District 50 is so spread out, and you don't want to leave anyone out. So I tried to include major areas within D50, District 50, that personified what an after dark scene would look like.
Yeah, very cool. So I've got a sense of what you do as the show's graphic designer. You make logos, backdrops, and other visual elements that we use in the show. What do you do as a production assistant?
As a production assistant, basically, you come up with ideas or individuals that you may want to interview at some point in time, and you contact them and make sure they would be interested in performing or being interviewed for the podcast, and try and formulate some questions, make it an idea on where you as the host would want to take the interview.
Yeah. Now, in Toastmasters, generally, when we work on projects like our podcast, it's not just about making the product. It's about learning something in the process. What would you say you've been learning being a part of this podcast?
Well, one of the things, my specialty is I like to learn about history. I will always try and relate something historical with the time that we're being interviewed, or maybe say that this week in particular, as an example. This is the 83rd, I think it is, 87th anniversary of the Hindenburg. So I would try and bring out all the activity involving the Hindenburg as a bit of a backdrop for, say, if we had someone from that era we were interviewing.
The Hindenburg, that's the big airship that crashed, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Are you a history buff?
Not in the sense of a major, but yes, I do like history, and to me, history is a thing that you want to learn about what went on prior, so that you don't make the same type of mistakes. I know that's easier said than done, but a lot of times that we overlook uh, historical factors in whatever we do, and we tend to make those same mistakes over and over again. So that's why I like history. I like to bring it out. I like just in casual talk. I always would like to um, highlight what occurred maybe on this particular date in history.
No, very cool. Well, Jerry, we heard a little bit about what you do for the podcast. I'd like to learn a little bit more about you yourself. You've been in Toastmasters since 2016?
Correct.
Yeah. And what's your educational level in Toastmasters?
I'm an IP2, and it's to me. This is I enjoy Toastmasters, but I'm not the type to. Even though I like history and I like to tell stories, I'm not one to give a whole bunch of speeches. I like to be behind the scenes, putting things together. I also enjoy being the actual Toastmaster themselves, just highlighting a particular meeting. Like I said, the other night we had a club meeting, and the theme was history repeats itself. So I brought out some historical facts about this week in history and tried to relate that to what we have going on in present time.
Yeah. And I'm still learning all the pathway acronyms. IP is
Integrative. Whoa, boy! Now you put me on the spot there.
didn't know there was going to be a quiz.
Yes, I didn't know that. Integrated production. I think it is. I'm gonna have to go back and find out that.
Okay. All right. Well, now you have been you were in the telecom industry for 32 years.
Yes, I started out in the Air Force uh, in the telecommunications field. Spent 6 years in the Air Force, being at stations at Germany, Korea, and Andrews Air Force Base outside of Washington, D.C. After I was honorably discharged from the Air Force, I went to work for a satellite company that specialized in long distance telephones. And from there, I went to work. I worked, it was in Northern Virginia, worked there 2.5 years, took a job with a company called Electronic Data Systems, who had just been purchased by GM, and moved up to Detroit, Michigan, and helped set up their control centers both in Southfield, Michigan, and then later we moved the whole operations down to Plano, Texas. So I ended up spending 26 years at Electronic Data Systems.
So you've lived in New York City, Detroit City, in the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex, and probably other places. Being in the Air Force, what was your favorite city to live in?
Probably, I really enjoyed the Washington, D.C. area. Very expensive because I lived in Northern Virginia, but it was a really nice place. It was a neat environment because you have, I know it has a bad connotation to Washington Swamp, but the whole telecom industry at the time when I left the Air Force was just exploding. And there were companies all over Washington in the surrounding area that were interested in getting qualified people from the telecommunications industry. And I just was lucky enough to be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, and what exactly did you do in the telecom industry? Were you a graphic designer for that industry?
No, it was not. Basically, I worked in mostly control center operations. So the first position was satellite operations or satellite technician. We basically had telephone switches connected around the country via satellite. And it was my job to monitor each one of those Earth stations around the country. From there, when I left and went to EDS, we kind of duplicated that same type of operations, only this time it was mostly on a terrestrial basis. And then later on, I got involved for the last 19 years of my term at EDS, working on what they had. They termed it was the business television network, and we did that all via satellite. So I got involved in a lot of both special projects and regular company type projects, be it education or be it company news via satellite. So that was the bulk of my time. The graphics design really just came about when I left EDS. I went back to school to learn a little bit about video production, and that was part of the curriculum, was learning about graphic design and how to lay out a backdrop, maybe for a logo or for a particular scene. So that's how I got involved with the graphic design portion.
Yeah, and Jerry, so you worked for a long time for EDS, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but that's one of the two big IT companies started by the legendary Russ Perot.
That's correct. You know your history there.
Yeah. Did you ever have the opportunity to meet with Russ Perot?
I met him briefly. This is a funny story here because Russ had started EDS, I think, in '62, and the legend says that he used $1,000 of his wife's money to start the company, and he built it into a multi-billion-dollar company. GM bought him in the mid-'80s, I believe it was, and he moved on to start up another company, Perot Systems. But I did meet him when he was running for president. I worked on his campaign, which was that was a exciting time to be involved with someone that I actually knew running for president.
That is a pretty exciting story. All right, well, Jerry, it has been a pleasure bringing you on the show, hearing about what you do for the podcast, and learning a little bit about you and your rich history, traveling all over the world, working in the telecom industry. Thank you so much for everything you do, and thank you for your service in the Air Force.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, well, we'll be seeing you soon, Jerry.
Okay.
Thank you. That's it for another episode of D50 After Dark. Stay tuned next time when we'll be meeting another one of our team members, Helen Williams.